Welcome to the Wagon Wheel podcast with Jarrod Kimber, that's me, and Bharat Sundaresan, that's him. And we're going to answer all your questions. By all your questions, I mean if you ask questions beforehand on Patreon that I've already sent Bharat before he went to bed last night,
Yes.
or if you put any questions in the super chats. There's this cool thing now where the super chats just automatically get starred. So I can't miss your super chats. I don't need Bharat to suddenly go, wait a minute, we can't end the show. There's one more here. So
No.
we will get on with the questions, some good ones in the from the Patreons. Remember, if you want to support us on Patreon, go over there, you buy the membership, and then you can ask the questions ahead of time. Make sure that you never miss out. But Swami Nathan says, do you think that by becoming is this not a
I mean,
question
this
from
is
last
from.
week?
This is. I think. Okay. This is also a reminder. I saw one of these comments. It's Swami Nathan.
Swami
Jared.
Nathan,
Swami.
thank you.
Yeah. I think this is It's just the universe making sure, or Muku making
No, it's
sure
good.
that.
He's probably asked
Yeah.
another question anyway. All
I'm
right,
sure he has.
we'll start at number two. Swami Nathan, you almost asked a question, but you did not. Christopher says, does the ICC have any genuine interest in growing the game for associate countries? Sorry if this question could get you in trouble. I don't think I could be in any more trouble with the ICC. But surely the ICC could make payments to countries to support players being able to pay players at the qualifiers. Okay, so the best way of explaining this is that the ICC doesn't really have any money. The
Hmm.
ICC makes money from all the teams playing, but anything it does with that money, it has to go through the boards. That money going to the other teams just is not going to happen. I think we've just seen now that India have finally got a bigger chunk of their money. In England and Australia have done that as well. They've also been hosting all the tournaments themselves. The one thing that the ICC did do, which did slip by for a long time, was that Bob Woolmer and then Richard Doan did a brilliant thing where they basically coached up all the associate teams.
Yeah.
And that's
True.
why we've really had this, you know, I was going to say renaissance, not even a renaissance. The first real burst of non-test playing nations being so good comes from everything they did. In fact, up until the 2018 World Cup, they even had access to video footage and analysis and all that sort of stuff through sports mechanics. Then the new ICC CEO came in and he went, what? We're giving teams money to be good at cricket. Well, that's not going to help us. Look, it's very short-sighted because obviously eventually having a good team in Netherlands and having a good team in Thailand and having a good team wherever actually adds to the TV rights. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense, but that's not how international cricket is run, and that's why it's done that way. But you're right, Christopher. It could easily do this, and there are plenty of people at the ICC that did want to do this, that used to do this, and would still love to do this.
Yeah. All 3 points on the money from you, Jared. But the thing is, I've always believed that there's a fine balance between most things in life. There's a fine balance between whether while I drink this frothy coffee, whether I get some of the froth on my mustache or not. There's a fine line. I have to make
Is it
sure I don't.
is it a mustache if it's connected to a beard?
That's a very good question. I would like to
Anyway,
believe it's not because I'm not a big mustache fan. So I think it is a. I like the fact that it's part of what I call a beard. See, but these are the kind of discussions that don't happen at the ICC. That they should, because going back to my fine line, there is a fine line between sport and business, and when sport becomes it's a complete business. And I think every sport around the world deals with that issue on a daily basis, especially has in the last 20 years or so. And I think somewhere down the line, once India became the superpower in cricket, and for a variety of reasons, I'm actually trying to figure it out and write an analytical, uh, it, almost a. I don't like to write commentary pieces, but I'm trying to do one on this whole ICC revenue share that's happened with India taking a chunk of the share, or a major chunk of the share anyway, and how it's come about and why it's not black and white. It's not just a case of India. You're either on the BCCI side and say, of course, it's fair. They make all the money. They should take all the money. And I don't think it's fair for the other extreme as well, of them being accused of being these greedy, bloodsuckers who just want to like completely run world cricket dry, just because for their own vested interest. I don't think that's fair either, because let's face it. I mean, if logically speaking, yeah, I mean, $9 out of $10, as we know, in world cricket is made a courtesy India or Indian cricket. Or
See, I fundamentally don't think that's true, by the way.
it's not
Also,
true.
if that was really true, where is the audit that actually shows where all the rights are sold around the world? When do we actually get to find out if there are Indian fans, for instance, in India who don't want to watch the Indian team, who want to watch other teams? So I get what you're saying, and
No,
I'm actually not against this. But wait, oh, have you frozen? I've frozen Bharat, mid
no.
mustache. Um, but I definitely understand that, and I think there's a better thing to say it. But you actually need to do the audit correctly. You actually need
No,
to
no.
go through it, and they haven't done that. It's complete
They
nonsense
haven't,
what they
which
do.
is part of it. Which is
Yeah.
part of it. That's just the narrative that's been coming through from various quarters of world cricket, especially the ICC. And look, when you have uh, such a strong association between the
Mm.
BCCI and the ICC, which has been there for the last many years now. Well, when Sashank Manohar was at the helm, and the other party was in charge of the BCCI. At this point, don't forget Sashank Manohar had gone from being BCCI chief to the ICC. So there were some other battles being fought as well, which went well beyond world cricket and the interests of associate countries and other countries. So and going back to what you were saying, I mean, it's right when in terms of uh, coaching, access to great coaching. You spoke about Bob Woolmer. There was Bob Cotton before that.
Yeah.
Even the likes of Gary Sobers and Mohinder Amarnath in the past went
Mm.
and coached. Sandeep Patil did that as well. They all
Derek
went and
Pringle did Oman.
he did he? Yeah. So which yeah in itself is I'm sure would be a great story. So there was a lot of even like when we were growing up in the 90s, there was a lot of talk of that being the case, and we saw the
Mm.
likes of Kenya and some others come on board, like Bangladesh, for example, even Scotland, and maybe by 2007 and Ireland come on board, and you saw there was growth in cricket as a world sport. But I think once you brought in all these, like obviously strongly business minded people, and we've spoken about this in the past, some of the richest people, industrialists and
Mm.
money makers in India or around the world. Once it's not just India, right? Like when you speaking of Lachlan Murdoch and everyone else
Yeah.
involved in it, all around the world. Once you started bringing these people in, um, uh, their focus was always going to be on how to make this a out and out business, if that makes sense, right? Like that's the fine line I speak about. And then they it's only understandable, I wouldn't say fair or not fair, that they would look at every avenue which will make them money, which will make them money and make
Yep.
like a profit for
I
that's just
get
how
that.
they think. Yeah.
This is what I was told when the Big Three takeover happened, right?
Mm.
And I'll say the same thing to you that I said to the people who were running cricket at the time, which is you cannot tell me it is a better business model to restrict where you can make your money. It's when we say they're trying to make the most money, they're not. They're doing what businesses do when they take over a dying business and they go, oh, we need to cut costs everywhere and make sure we have more profits. No, you don't. This is the second biggest sport in the world. I Googled this the other day. I
Yeah.
Googled a Google list of what sport is Googled the second most. It's like football, cricket, and like space, right? It's a massive sport. There is no reason why it cannot make more money and it cannot be pushed more. What I would say is, and I think we both agree on this, the ICC aren't going to fix this anyway. They don't have the power to
No.
fix this. They don't have the
No.
money to fix this. So when Christopher asked this question, realistically, the thing that is going to help all these associate countries is franchise cricket, right?
It
Because
is.
their best
Yeah.
players are going to start getting picked up. Have a look what even the fair break in the women's cricket has already started to do for
Yeah.
smaller countries.
Exactly. Yeah.
That is actually far more fair. You know, you got Ali Khan, you got Sandeep Lamachane, you got all these different players popping up everywhere. The renaissance of Zimbabwe cricket is a lot to do with the fact that a lot of their players started getting picked up in franchise cricket again, right?
Absolutely right.
You know,
Yeah, that's exactly the point. Like when I think people just uh, enter into this whole doomsday kind of mindset with cricket, where they immediately start talking about, oh, cricket as I know it is gone and Test
mm,
cricket is dead. But everything is changing around you. Don't forget, in very soon, our we're going to be taken over by what Chat GPT I hear about every day,
yeah.
and like there's so many reports of what artificial intelligence is going to do in terms of takeover. How long are we going to be recording this podcast? And it's not just going to be too I don't even know how it works. So I have like
Well,
there's like a
I've already recorded your voice, and on
Thank you.
future episodes, I'm just going to type out your answers beforehand, and then you'll always be here on time.
See, there you go. But this it's a great topic to maybe break up. Next week, I'm appearing on the other show, so maybe we can deal with it in depth.
Mm.
Uh, the one where we don't answer questions, but we ask questions to ourselves. But all I'll say is, Christopher and everybody else listening and watching. I don't think cricket is coming to an end. It's
Mm.
changing for sure, and you're right. I mean, I don't think associate cricketers are dead and buried, and maybe associate teams will not get the opportunities that
Yeah.
probably they thought they would have 15, 20 years ago, because the market has changed. And the way Indian cricket has run this sport for the last few years, you'll see again, everybody else is making more money as well, more money than they were, not
Mm.
more money than, like, or the same kind of money that India will. So opportunities will grow. Test cricket will stay alive for all the bigger nations. Unfortunately, a lot of the other countries might struggle, which also then brings into question what's the point of the World Test Championship. I think so. There are a lot of
Yeah.
things that are breakaway points that we can discuss in the future. But for now, Christopher, don't worry. I mean, do worry about associate teams. I mean, Ireland is not going to play a 5 Test match series against whoever in any
Well,
time in the
well,
future, or
well,
maybe
based
never.
on
But
his question, you have Scotland and Netherlands should have been good chance to qualify for the World Cup, and they're probably not going to qualify for the World Cup now because their best
yeah,
players aren't playing. Um,
exactly.
and that's the truth of it. And they're not the only teams over the last couple of years who have not had their best players playing when they need to, and that's going to happen more and more. And I've got an article coming out about that one very soon as well.
Oh,
Is it Niran?
Netherlands.
Oh, sorry.
Netherlands are missing out because some of the players are staying back in county cricket. So it's
Yeah,
not
that's what I
just.
mean.
Oh, that's
That's
what
what I
you mean.
mean.
Yeah.
Like it's there's always that, and that always happens. The history of that in cricket is so deep, and I don't think people know.
Mm.
I'll save the Billy Midwinter kidnapping story for my video in a couple of days. Is
Yes,
it
please.
since we're doing pronunciations? Is it? I'm always not sure with this one. Is it Niran? Niran?
That's a very good question. I think it is. It is Niran.
Niran. Good.
Yeah.
He says hi, Jared. Doesn't even say hi to Bharat. Even better. When calculating true metrics like your IPL MVP videos, do performances in playoffs, finals, and must-win games carry a higher weight compared to performances in less important games? No. I think if we had a season where it was like 40 IPL round robin games and 15 playoff games, I'd probably have two different stats. But
Mm.
we're talking about maybe one game a season, maybe two games a season, at most 3 games a season. It's not that much. And I'll say this: do you remember that big narrative that Chris Gale wasn't very good in finals?
Mm.
So I figured, well, it must be true. Everyone said it. And, there are the T20 dogs who watch a lot more than me. They were
Yeah.
positive of it. And I went back and I had a look at his numbers in finals. I think he averaged something like 45 with a strike rate of 162 or something,
Oh, really?
right?
Yeah.
Now, he'd failed in a couple of actual finals, big
Yeah.
ones. He'd been very good in a lot of semi-finals. He'd been very good in a couple of finals. He played one of the best innings I've seen, actually, which was at the Oval against Sri Lanka in the World Cup semi-final of 2009,
Nine.
when I think Angelo Matthews took 8 wickets in the first over. That's how I remember it.
Good. Yeah.
So my point is, quite often people point to that. If we had a bigger sample size,
Mm.
I'd be happy with that. But what you'll end up with like one player who's got like really good stats because do you remember when I think it was the cricketer with Simon Hughes did this analytics to try and work out who the best T20 cricketer in the world was, and they counted trophies won. And of course, Dan Christian
No.
was like the second best player or the best player in the
Yeah.
world, right? Because he'd won like a million trophies. And so, don't get me wrong, Dan Christian was a fantastic player, but he
It
also
was.
didn't particularly do that much for Australia and didn't particularly do that much for the IPL. Are we really
Hmm.
saying he's in the top, 2 or 3 best players in the world? Maybe the top 20 or 30 at times.
Yeah.
You can overestimate what someone can do based on small sample size. Really, really easy. And if you ever need to see that, Niran, have a look at Dawid Milan's entire career, international.
Yeah. And especially in T20 cricket as well. Or the shorter the format gets, more complicated it gets in terms of putting a lot of innings into context, or a lot of
Yeah.
performances into context, like spells and like you
Mm.
so. For example, they keep showing the leaderboard of who's taken the most number of wickets. I mean, we spoke about Tushar Deshpande at some point. And look, it doesn't matter whether we look at his numbers in high economy rate and say he's not done a good job. So what if he's taken a lot of wicket? Also, then you have to dive deeper and see what impact it had on
Hmm.
that particular match when he took those 3 wickets and went for 45 runs or whatever, right? Like, and how many runs did Chennai score? Like, was he defending
When you take the
220?
wickets, right?
Exactly. When,
Yeah,
when when you take the wickets, and 3 for 45 when you're defending 220 is very different to 3 for 45 when you're defending 140, right? Like, yes,
exactly.
3 for 45, more or less you've lost the game for your
Hmm.
team in terms
Three
of
for
like
45 when you bot and all your 3 wickets are in the last 3 overs and the other team's made 220. Again, doesn't make as much difference. So
doesn't make as
I think
much.
that's very fair. That's where analytics is obviously going step by step,
Yeah.
and we're moving there. But there's so many parts of that to analyze. Ian
Yeah.
says, what are the biggest domestic cricket rivalries in Australia? He talks about the New South Wales Queensland Rugby
Mm.
League thing. Victoria, New South Wales has always been the biggest one. They were the two biggest
Yeah.
states. You know, the two early leaders of Australia. Those games were played like test matches back in the old days. In fact,
Mm.
one of the first games I was taken to was a Victoria New South Wales game, and my dad talked it up like I thought it was a test match because I was about 8 or 9, and it was only later I
Yeah.
realized I wasn't watching a test match. They used to get huge crowds too. You used to get 30, 40, 50,000 for some of those Shield days. They used to play on Boxing Day, of course, as well. And I would say Western Australia versus everyone is probably the other one that
Yeah.
I would put out there just because Western Australia, no matter how many Western Australians get picked or don't get picked, they seem to hang on to that. Victoria's a bit like that as well, but Western Australia seems to take it to another level. There was a little bit between Queensland and New South Wales, but I don't think Queensland and New South Wales has ever felt on both sides. I don't know how you feel
Mm.
about it. I think that was more a Queensland thing than a New South Wales thing. Whereas New South Wales, Victoria, up until New South Wales probably just got too good,
Yeah.
was a very good rivalry. I don't think it's as big anymore. I mean, you're over there more than I am these days, but it
Mm.
doesn't feel like, felt like when Victoria played New South Wales in the Shield, you'd get a lot more coverage in Melbourne. The New South Wales fans would get involved. I don't feel that happens as much as it did even 15 years ago.
Depends on whether some of the test players are
That's
available.
true.
Because
Yeah.
in the last 2 or 3 years, there have been, I think, yeah, every year there's been one New South Wales Victoria match where a lot of the test players have been available, especially for New South Wales. They've had Stark and maybe not Cummins always, but Stark and Lyon have played a lot of
Yeah.
Shield cricket together. Even Steve Smith has popped up and played some Shield cricket. So whenever those guys are around, obviously it gets heightened.
Mm.
Not so much the rivalry, but just the excitement or the energy about that game. In terms of, I mean, speaking of the state of origin, it's going to happen next week here in Adelaide, the first of the state of origin matches. I would have loved to have gone for that.
How
Because
much
one thing
money
I've
does the
learned,
Adelaide government have? Are they just trying to buy up all these random events, or what the hell is going on?
I, I know. I mean, from the gather round, they brought back the motor race that had gone away from Adelaide for a
How much
long
money
time.
can you make from all the massage parlors on Hindley
Hindley
Street
Street.
to
Well,
actually
clearly a lot.
tax? It's ridiculous. Yeah, I
uh,
think back in the days when it was big, it was, there weren't as many test matches played, of course, and major teams
yeah,
didn't come out as often, and so Victoria, New South Wales was a de facto test match. Now, as you said, I think when the Australian players play, it's quite big. I remember when Shane Warne went up against Mark Waugh and Mike Taylor and
mm,
Steve Waugh and all that. That was a really big deal.
yeah.
But yeah, and also the Big Bash has complicated things, right? Because it's not quite the same as it used to be as well. So I'd be surprised if there's ever going to be another big rivalry in that, unless there's like some sort of grudge, someone steals someone's captain or something.
Victoria versus Western Australia, purely in terms of competition, in terms of them producing some of the better younger players or a lot of players who've come broken through into the Australian team in the last few years, has been quite a contest. I mean, they've also kind of shared titles in the last few years. So I
Yeah.
think that again, it hasn't reached that Victoria versus New South Wales Test Stars versus Test Stars battle of the 90s. You hear stories from back then, but I think it's right up there. And you're right with Western Australia versus the world is generally the narrative most times. Forget
Mm.
about cricket, but everything
Yeah.
else we saw it, especially during COVID. Yeah, you speak to players and they also talk about players from the past. Also talk about how whenever you played against Queensland and when Alan Border was captain and those guys were around in the 80s and 90s, it was the toughest. Go to the Gabba and to play
Yeah.
against Queensland was generally the biggest challenge in Shield cricket.
Yeah, Border and then Stuart Law.
Yeah.
Certainly made a big one there. Jack says, will mainstream English cricket writers ever cover the IPL properly? Most of it just comes across as bitter and childish. I would suggest that mainstream cricket writers don't cover the IPL properly in any country at all. And the most important thing for this is, look, a lot of them are older, and so for them, they don't take it seriously. The same way that one day cricket wasn't written about seriously till about 8 years ago, 10, maybe 12 years ago, for being fair. But the other thing is that the economics of it isn't why they're paid. They're being paid to cover their international teams. And when they write articles about the IPL, they're not particularly getting any hits. In fact, writing about T20 cricket in general, IPL on down, doesn't really get readership. And so if you're a writer specifically, it's a really tricky thing to write about that league, unless you're massively into it. But yeah, I would say that IPL's not written correctly about, and I would say T20 cricket's not written correctly. And a lot of that is because the writers are over the age of 35, over the age of 40, over the age of 45, in some places over the age of 55. And they're not getting it. So I would never blame just the English cricket writers for this. I'd say the economics of cricket writing doesn't really support writing about T20 cricket.
Especially for English writers, unless you are writing not controversial things, but kind of tagging onto that narrative of how the IPL does ruin things.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Those are the pieces that get more hits, like or IPL franchises taking over the world, or when it almost sounds like at times when you read some of those pieces, not just from England but from all around the world as well, it almost seems like did you watch the Centurions growing up, the cartoon, like on TV, when Doc Terror and his evil companion Hacker were unleashing their forces to conquer Earth? That's what it sounds like. Watch it. Centurions used to be big on Cartoon Network when it broke into India in the 90s. But
old man shouts at clouds. That's
in a way, and also like just think about it, Jarrod. You and I are getting older in life. You faster than me, thankfully. The older you get, the more you want the world to end with you, right? Like that's when you start thinking, oh, you know what? Like this world will go on without me, and that's when you start kind of looking at everything through those doomsaying eyes that I keep going back to. So
did Bharat
a lot
just say, everyone, that he's entering his supervillain phase?
Yeah, maybe I am. I just spoke about the Centurions, but
Yeah.
you know what? Sorry, what has happened with that is any kind of change, and the IPL is bringing about a lot of change. It does push you into that sort of mindset. But I will say this though: I started covering cricket I started journalism in 2008, so 15 years now, like I said. So which is around the time the IPL started. So I joined journalism when the first IPL was going on. And the first 3 or 4 years, newspapers in India would send journalists all around the country. There would be like some newspapers had one person covering one franchise. So at every game, there were two journalists from the same newspaper. Hotels, spending money on hotels and travel and all of that. But then, like you said, the economics didn't work out. And we were the first paper, the Indian Express, to start saying, look, let's write reports of TV because it's not worth spending so much money for a 3-hour game. And what are the returns, right? Like you're getting a T20 report or a nice story about a T20 match. We can do it from home. So it's not just the English writers, like you said, but even here in the big BBL, you don't have journalists traveling around. And I think it's a good time, though, to give a shout out to someone who has really invested a lot of time and energy into it, is Jarrod Kimber, yes. But also the new Jarrod Kimber, who I'm a big fan of, is Matt Roller, who was.
Well, I was about to say that.
Now.
It's interesting because Jake picks up on English. I'd say Freddie Wilde and Matt Roller have been two of the best T20 writers around,
absolutely.
and they're both English. Absolutely. So it is interesting the way he's looking at it. He's right. Me and Will McPherson traveled around the Big Bash. I've done little bits in the IPL as well. It doesn't make any money. Every time I've done it, eventually the editor's gone, I get a call from Sampit going, but that was good. Wasn't that nice that you did that? Now can you go back to a test match? Because people read test matches, partly because the next day you want to know. I always say that match reports or articles from a test match are a bit like, when you're watching a TV show and you have the previously come up on Law and Order, and you have whatever it is, right? That's exactly what a match report is. Whereas a T20 game, you're just like, oh, we've already moved on from that. Like it's a completely different thing. Anyway, me and Barrett are going to have a quick break on Wagon Wheel, and we'll be back in a moment.
Our next partner is Athletic Greens. If cricket has taught us anything, it's that green things are good for you. I take AG1 by Athletic Greens every day. I gave AG1 a try because a while back I was stuck in a studio reporting on New Zealand, England on overnights. When those games weren't on, I was up early watching India, Australia at around 4 a.m. In between afternoon naps, I had to watch the Women's World Cup. And when all that was finished, I was doing early mornings for Bangladesh, England. Ignoring the fact that there's too much cricket, that's a stupid schedule for a human being as well. And so Athletic Greens was a far better alternative to ice baths. And after taking it, I felt a lot better. In fact, the whole thing probably kept me sane and healthy at the same time. And also being the kind of nutritional drink I needed to survive those hours, and also the 2 a.m. biltong binges I did a few times. Look, I am not going to pretend I have a balanced diet. So Athletic Greens is how I cover the nutritional basis. 1 small scoop of AG1 with water, and I drink it first thing in the morning each day. Done. If a comprehensive solution is what you need from your supplement routine, then Athletics Greens is giving you a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and also 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Go to athleticgreens.com/Inca. That's the Inca from the end of my Red Inca podcast. So athleticgreens.com/Inca. Check it out now because it is the best green top you'll ever invest in.
Welcome back on Wagon Wheel. Abhinav says, Jarrod has often said that the way that things are currently going, it is inevitable that IPL owners will become more powerful than the BCCI. In order to reduce the possibility of that happening, what can the BCCI do? Wouldn't the obvious answer be to not expand the number of IPL teams? Well, he goes on to say not to make the IPL season longer and everything else. Yes, that would be how the BCCI would maintain the power. That's not how they would make more money. The more teams, the longer it is, the more money that they will make. Eventually, we don't know. We don't really know how the IPL is going to go, but let's forget Saudi Arabia and imagine Major League Cricket doesn't take off and all that sort of stuff. You would assume that they're looking at between 4 and 8 months season. It might be 30 years away. It might be 10 years away. Who knows? But it's a long way away. But that's probably what they're looking at because that's what the biggest sports in the world do, right? And if that's the case, that's how they're going to make the most money. But the more they do that, the more owners that come in, the less powerful the BCCI is. There's no way around that.
Exactly.
So if they want more power, which is how cricket boards sometimes think, Baron, they might keep it smaller, but eventually they're just going to look at their bottom line and they're going to say, we need more teams, we need more games, we need more money. I could be wrong, but I don't think I
am. Yes and no. I think, or you find these offshoot leagues elsewhere, like it's already started happening. I mean, the SAT20 league, for example, when you have someone as influential as Sundaresan have such a big stake in it, it doesn't just mean it's Sundaresan who has a stake in it. It means that Indian cricket in many ways has a stake in it. The number of people involved with Indian cricket who've invested money in USA cricket and the major cricket league that's going to happen very soon. So that's another way of doing it. Because I remember back in the day, in 2009-10, reporting about people who was in charge of the BCCI at that point saying, "Oh, we need 2 IPLs, a summer IPL and a winter IPL." There were also talk of expanding the IPL, like you said, to making it a 6-month tournament. But my only reservation against that's too long to the one reason the IPL works from an Indian market sense is it happens at the best time of the year. It's hot, really, really hot in most parts of India to go outside. It's summer vacations, the school vacations, the kids are at home. And also, obviously, in the last few years, the spending power of a lot of people in urban India has grown. And it's actually good to see the things that the IPL and the BCCI are doing in all the smaller centers where they can't take live matches too, but having all these. I would love to go one day and watch a cricket game at one of these live IPL parks and see what happens. Everybody seems to be dancing and having fun, but I want to know if they genuinely are having fun or if they are actually watching the IPL while they're there. So I think I don't see a 6-7 month long IPL happening, but and the battle, like Abhinav was saying, between the BCCI and the IPL franchise owners, I think now they're neck and neck almost in terms of the power they have. I remember saying this on radio a few weeks ago when Manoj Badale, your good friend, gave that interview to one of the English newspapers. And back in the day, you could have just said, some IPL owner saying something. What does he know about cricket? But now those people have a major say in what's
Mhm.
going to happen to the future of cricket. You have to take what they say seriously, and they're smart people as well when it comes to understanding
Oh
how
yeah.
this business grows. They're not just some rich people who uh, own IPL teams or have a big stake in IPL teams or cricket teams for fun. It's not something. Maybe it was the case back in the day,
When
but
they
not
bought
anymore.
them, for some
When
people,
they
yeah.
bought them,
It's
yeah,
not
you
the
would
case for most, certainly not the newer
no.
owners and not the smarter owners. Look, I get what you're saying about the other tournaments, and it could be the case that the South African tournament's so successful, or the Emirates tournament, or the Major League, that we never get to 6-month IPL, but we're certainly going to
Yeah,
have a 4-month IPL at the very least, I would think, one day. And being that it's the best time zone, it's the best market, the crowds are going to be the best. I just
yeah,
don't see why you would ever want to invest in the other things, unless, as you said, more and more powerful people
yeah.
outside of cricket come in. But that's the same thing, Abhinav, right? Like if I don't know, if Elon Musk buys a league or a team or whatever, right? And Elon Musk is a big cricket fan. I'm sad to say it, but it's true. And so all these people could do that. Then at that stage, then it doesn't even matter if the IPL gets big or whatever, because if you
No.
just keep bringing in the most powerful people over and over again, then they're going to have the biggest say. And the BCCI is a organization that is beset by pettiness, by amateurism at times, by split opinions, by regions, by language, by design, right? Like that's just what it is. You can't go up against, Donald Trump or Elon Musk. I don't know why those two, but it's probably right. Donald Trump probably doesn't like cricket. Niran says he couldn't even say India. Was it India
Yeah.
he couldn't say? Or was it Ahmed Bad he couldn't say? He couldn't
Well,
say
he couldn't
something.
say Sachin Tendulkar or Virat
That's
Kohli.
right. It was such. I knew there was one that he. Yeah.
Suchin and Virat Kohli is what he said, I think.
Nirad says, what do you think of Taman Iqbal, the test batter? He has very good stats in England and New Zealand, never played a test in Australia and just won in India. His century at Lords was one of my favourites. I was there for that. In fact, it was probably one of the last things I ever did as a fan. I think my wife bought me tickets before I was even in the press corps. Look, he's a really talented player, but I find it hard to think we're not all going to look back and go, he just should have been better. And I don't think that's slagging him off in any way, but when he's good, he's so good that it's hard to look at his overall record and think to yourself, he's made the most out of his career. He might be a player who's not best suited to his local conditions in some ways,
True.
which sometimes happens, right? I mean, that's just. Please see Ajinkya Rahane for, sometimes those things just happen at the international level. But I still think he's a fantastic player, and he's going to go down as one of the early great Bangladesh players without any doubt.
The first time I saw him live was when I went to Bangladesh in 2010. So it was a tri-series, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and a 2-match test series. And I honestly thought, and obviously he'd been playing international cricket for 2-3 years at that point. And the first time Indians saw him is when he charged down at Zahir Khan in 2007 in that infamous World Cup game, which knocked out India and changed world cricket forever. Don't forget, it's a very, very big game that people don't talk about enough. And I really thought in 2010, watching him live, that this is almost and as blasphemous as it might sound to some Pakistani cricket fans, I thought it was the second coming of Saeed Anwar. Like just the way how wristy he was, the ability to score in that, like a lot of left-handers have that ability, but you couldn't even miss your line by half an inch when it came to on his offside. He was so strong there. He played the pull shot really well. You're right. I mean, he almost looked a better batter when the ball was coming onto the bat, like when there was bounce on the pitch. So maybe he would have enjoyed Australian conditions a lot more if he had got a chance to play more often here. And similarly with South Africa. So I think there was a lot of talent, but also tells you there's so much. I mean, people talk about the pressure of being an Indian cricketer in India, but it's multiplied by 10 times when you're a Bangladeshi cricketer in Bangladesh, because and you've been there before, Jarrod. You've covered cricket there. You've
I've
covered
never been.
Cricket. Oh, you've never been?
No, I was supposed to do the 2014 World Cup, but I'd been on the road for about 5 straight months, and I had to call up Samba and say, I just can't. I can't do another tournament. Please let me go. And at that stage, I was like, this is not a problem. I'll go to Bangladesh next year, the year after, and I've never had another offer to go.
There you
go.
Yeah.
Look, obviously, I know what you're talking about. Mohammed Issam told me recently that he thinks it's I'm not sure what his exact words were, but he thinks the pressure has eased off. Bangladesh has changed a little bit as a nation, and they don't have the same kind of pressure on themselves as cricketers as they once did. But I'm with you. I think there was that period, probably from almost 2008 through to 2019, 2018, where they had more pressure than the Indian players, right? I mean, cricket is bigger in Bangladesh, or was in that period, than it was in India, right? Like it was big everywhere, and so I do think it was different. I think you're right. I'm not sure that's why he ended up with an average of 38. I think it's probably more to do with he doesn't make a lot of runs at home.
And then he was captain for a while. Then he was.
They have dog shit pitches as well, at home.
There's so much, especially once you reach a point in Bangladesh cricket. We've seen it with Shakib, we've seen it with him, Tamim, we've seen it with Mushfiq as well, and Mahmudullah. There would be periods where they would like opt out of teams. There would be periods when they would want certain players as captains and they wouldn't get it, and they would give up captains. That captaincy has been shared around so much, a lot like Pakistan in the 1990s, if you think about it. Like, Wasim Akram would be captain, then Waqar Yunus would be captain, and then every time they needed an in-between side, Anwar would be thrown the ball, and then briefly Salim Malik would be captain again. So it's been a lot like that in Bangladesh cricket, especially between those four guys.
Ben says, I saw a video of Rashid Khan bowling Brian Lara in the BBL last year, and he looked pretty good. If someone could guarantee they would only play spin, similar to late Misbah, who would have the best late career? So I would have thought that Yunus Khan, Lara, Rahul Dravid are the three that probably make the most sense here. I was thinking about Michael Clark, but the thing with Michael Clark is he needed to be able to use his feet, and he would slow down. He wouldn't be able to use his feet as quick as he did when he was younger. Whereas I don't think the others, it mattered to them as much, or they played in a slightly different way. So I think, I mean, those of the modern cricketers, I suppose Kumar Sangakkara and Mahela are probably right up there as well, right? They probably could have gone on. But I thought Rahul Dravid might be the obvious one because he's still fit enough to go out and play now. Like he's, other than his penchant for eating ice cream, which I have seen more than a few occasions, loves an ice cream, but he's a very fit guy. And I'm going to throw up a random one. The other one would be Alistair Cook, I think, who... probably played spin far better than we ever give him any credit for. And again, a bit like Rahul Dravid, he's probably, Alistair Cook's going to be a fit 50-year-old and a fit 55-year-old, and the same with Rahul Dravid, whereas Brian Lara and Yunus Khan probably more enjoyed their retirement more, perhaps at times. Mahela enjoyed his retirement slightly more.
But Brian Lara's back to being very fit, and I was in Adelaide when
he wasn't very fit the whole time he's been retired, though.
Not the whole time. That's right. So when he faced Rashid Khan in the nets, and he came back up after his little stint, and we just bumped into each other next to the coffee area, and I asked him, so what was it like? Like, is he like that tough to pick? And he just looked at me and he said, well, honestly, I was picking him from the hand. And that just tells you like the genius of Brian Lara. When hundreds of batters around the world, modern day batters, have struggled to pick Rashid Khan, he just needed to see him, like he faced 2 or 3 balls and then he started picking him from the hand. That, again, this is the genius of Brian Lara. And anybody did say it like, under his breath. He didn't, at that point, he didn't want everyone to kind of know that, like, it's not that big a deal facing Rashid Khan. But I'm sure it was, but it was just how easily it comes to Brian Lara. I mean, look, Joe Root, I think even 20 years from now, if you ask him to play spin, I think he'll be really, really good at it just because of how brilliant his hands are. And I've spoken to a lot of Indian spinners who bowl to him, high profile spinners who say that, and you speak to any spinner from any era, they fear the guys who have the ability to take a single of their bowling at any point. Yeah. And this is what Joe Root knows to do. Like, he uses his hands so well, where it'll look like he's just defending the ball, but the last second he has the ability to do that or that and get off strike. And those are the kind of batters that spinners fear. So I think Joe Root will be one of those who, could just play on forever if it just has to do with playing spin. And I mean, look, if you are someone like VVS Lakshman, they're different kinds of players against spin, right? There's so much hand-eye.
Damien Martin was probably another one, wasn't he?
Damien Martin, for sure, yeah. I mean, played the ball really late as well.
I'm thinking of like 2 guys from that era that did that. Just on the overall question, Ben, I don't know if you saw it, but I did a video with Amol Dacey where he basically went through, and actually players fall off quite often a little bit quicker against spin than they do pace once they get
Yes.
over the age of 36. And it's because the footwork and the ability to move quickly is more important against spin than it is.
Yeah.
So someone like Joe Root, who plays either a long way forward with a long reach or sweeps or goes all the way back, probably won't lose it as much as Pajara or Michael Clark, who are using their feet a lot more, those sorts of players. So I think there are specific players who would always be successful against it and some who won't. But it's interesting that to notice that against spin. And the other thing is that you still have to actually react to spin. So even if you're Brian Lara and you're picking it, it's how much it spins and the odd one that doesn't spin and everything else. A lot of things that Brian Lara didn't have to play against, like bowlers bowling cross seam deliveries and all that sort of stuff. Manan Shah says, I know you're not a pace bowler. You say that. But what advice would you give to any left arm pacers trying to be better? Look, I've always said, learn every skill. Just try and swing it in, try and swing it out, try and bowl an off cutter, try and bowl a leg cutter. Wobble ball, a knuckle ball. Too many left armers basically can bowl 1/2 deliveries, and it means you're fighting against a bunch of other people who can do the exact same thing. But I'll take it from the man with the incredible bowling action.
Indeed, as a former left-arm fast bowler myself, I can give you some advice, man. And firstly, something I struggle with, focus on your front arm a lot, because that kind of, it's true for all kind of fast bowlers, your right arm or left arm, but especially for left armers, I think if you can focus a lot on that, a lot of left arm bowlers in the history of the game have struggled with that. Because if you can get strong, I'm not sure actually why a lot more left armers.
Gareth Batty explained it to me, and it was accidental. We were trying to talk about left arm wrist spinners, and I said left arm wrist spinners don't have a strong arm, and he said that's because they probably have to collapse their body further to get the ball outside the off stump.
Yeah, true. Also, that makes sense. Yeah.
And once he said it, straight away I was just like, oh my God, that's all left arm bowlers. And it completely changed the way I thought about left arm. But you're right. If you can get that strong front arm. So Brad Hogg, I know he's not a seam bowler, but very good example of having a very strong front arm.
Dan Vittori,
Yeah. And if you can do that, I think you're going to have, because the front arm allows you to be more consistent, right? It's the difference between being Rahat Ali and being Trent Bolt, essentially, at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well,
look at Mitchell Stark. But Mitchell Stark, such a strong front arm. And another thing I'll say is, if you can develop the ball that comes back in as a left armer early on in your career or early on in your life, it goes a long way, because the angle a lot can generate just naturally. It's true though. It can just and you will end up bowling more to right-handers than left-handers. That's just how it works out in whatever level of cricket you play. So you have the natural angle which you can use to your strength if you start working on bringing the ball back in very early on. And then there are so many basic tricks that you can use, like just bowl the off cutter with the angle, come around the wicket and bowl the off cutter.
I was going to say.
Yeah, but
I think that's the new one for left armers. I think that you watch Mustafiza come around the wicket with an off cutter, and we've seen Mitchell Johnson do it as well.
Yeah.
If you could swing the ball the other way, which we're seeing people like Arshdeep start to do.
Yeah.
If you could do that, we've already seen what right arm bowlers do to left-handers when they come around the wicket and move the ball away from them. I think so. That's why I think with left armers, I think you're right. I think the first thing that you have to conquer is that ball that comes back into right-handers, right?
Yes.
But then the minute you have that, you can't stop. That can't be your one delivery.
No. Yeah.
Because you need to be a bit more rounded. But the front arm things it's a fascinating thing, and I completely agree with that. Patrick said, I should say also I'm a father to a left arm fast bowler, although he's not sure if he wants to be a fast bowler or a wrist spinner, and quite often changes in the middle of overs, which does annoy me, but that's for another time. Patrick says, do you think Australia would be better served by using English style rotating bowling unit in the English tour, or should they keep playing the three best seamers? So Patrick, they did this for the last Ashes, and everyone hated it. And also it didn't work because every time they rotated someone, and they were taking someone out who was taking wickets and bringing someone in who didn't. That was just pure luck, of course, as much as anything. I think we'll see this for all long test series, as long as we have long test series from now on in, because I think bowlers are too valuable. Dan Bredig obviously wrote a really good piece about, when bowlers are injured, what that does to your chances of winning test matches and everything else. I don't know about you. I haven't talked to anyone really from the Australian camp yet, Bharat, but I would assume that for this particular tour, they won't do that, but they might do maybe a 4-man attack with one man rotating in rather than the five that they had last time.
No, that's a big difference between 2019 and now. Is just look at let's break it down. Right, in 2019, Mitchell Stark was coming off a very tough summer where he had struggled against India. He took 10 wickets in the last test he played. Uh, was it Canberra? Yes, against Sri Lanka and Canberra. But he was down on confidence, and this is the period when Justin Langer and the Australian team management were Tim Payne included. All of them were trying to get Mitchell Stark to be almost not a different kind of bowler, but be more consistent.
Yeah.
They were worried that he might leak runs in England, so that's why he didn't feature in the Test series till very late. What he played Old Trafford, right? So he had to wait till the fourth Test to get in because he kind of slipped in the pecking order as a result of like having those kind of question marks about him. Josh Hazelwood, if you remember, was left out of the World Cup squad because very similar to now, he was carrying an injury and they weren't sure about him going through the World Cup and being
Then he was
enough
fit, do you remember? And he still didn't get picked. And he was sitting
Exactly.
there going, wait a minute, they're saying I'm not here because I'm injured, but I'm actually bowling in games over here at the moment. But
And
yeah,
he bowled
you're right.
beautifully.
He wasn't fully fit coming in. That's true.
He wasn't. He bowled beautifully on that up and down pitch in Southampton in the Australia versus Australia A game.
Yeah.
But again, there were some question marks, and that was the reason they had Peter Siddle in there, almost as a safety blanket, and they used him quite a bit more than maybe they thought they would during that Ashes series. Jimmy
Well, it was
Pattinson
also-
was coming off.
Yeah, wasn't that the series that Peter Siddle had learnt the wobble ball? And
Yeah, that's true.
And so they thought he'd have more success with the wobble ball than he did. Eventually, he basically taught it to everyone else, and they had the success with it rather than him.
Yeah,
But it was all
and he'd
part of
had
it.
that really good run in county cricket the previous summer. He had like 2-3 really good years of county cricket. So that I remember interviewing Peter Siddle during that series, and he spoke about all of that. And my man Michael Neser was part of the squad, missed out. So not much has changed. He's not. I mean, now he's back in the mix. Obviously, hashtag Neser must play the campaign. The movement continues. So I think they will stick to a more. To Patrick's question, they might not rotate them as much as they did last time around. If they all stay fit. I mean, Josh Hazelwood is the big thing, right? If he can stay fit for even 3 or 4 test matches, he plays all. If he's fit, he plays regardless. And the schedule's also a way, like if you leave the World Test Championship final aside, so it's like they play 2 test matches, break, 2 test matches, break, right? Like so they play the World Test Championship final in the first test, and then they get almost 10-11 days off, and then they play the second and third Ashes test, and then again they get 10 days off. So there are enough breaks, and they're not playing tour games this time, so you can have enough or more time to recover and recuperate than you would on a normal Ashes tour.
Christopher says, does England have the most one format players in domestic cricket? There's a lot in the county game who only play first class cricket or T20. India doesn't have even some of the better Indian players who end up in the test team don't play much Ranji Trophy, to be fair. So it'd probably be India or England. Australia has a few, but nowhere near the amount I would think in England. There's just more money in English domestic cricket, so you can have a squad where you do that. It's not really something. There's no money in the rest of it, so it doesn't make as much sense. I would think.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but like going back to when I was just a kid watching cricket, England seemed to always have more one format players, but even back in the 90s, right? Like you'd find all these guys. Last week, I spoke about the famous 1997 Sharjah tournament that Adam Hollyoak and England won. That team had a lot of guys who I don't think played a lot of county cricket regularly anyway, right? And then you would have the likes. Or did Mark Elaine play a lot of, for example?
Yeah.
He didn't. He wasn't part of that squad. All right. Like, so I mean, look, Matthew Fleming and those guys, I'm sure they played county cricket, but at some point they started specializing in one-day cricket. I think there was that period, was it Gloucestershire who started winning a lot of one-day titles towards the end of the 90s?
They're an interesting one. But I mean, they still had Jack Russell and Ian Harvey, who were red ball players. So they were. I think the difference is that England have had a lot of teams. So I'm just having a look here. So Mark Elaine played 328 first-class games and 436. So a specialist in a way.
But
and,
not.
And the same with Matthew Fleming, a very similar amount. I think what they did was they started giving contracts to players based on their white ball skills a little bit more at
that's
times.
True. Yeah.
And Gloucester was a very good, and Northamptonshire did it later on. So I think that has happened more. I don't think it was that often that you had a player who was purely white ball. I want to say Ollie Mortensen. I'm trying to remember his record. Was he one? You remember the Dutch player for Derbyshire, was it? I want to say whoever he played for. Yeah, Derbyshire. Let's have a look. No, even he played both.
All right.
So yeah, I think there was certainly a lot of English players who talked about it in that way.
Yeah, talked about that. Yeah, that's right.
And I think after probably since Pro 40 started, that's when you start to get people, because there were 2 white ball competitions, 3 white ball competitions some years.
Yeah.
So it actually made sense to have specialists at that point. And now, of course, you also get overseas players who just come for the Blast and the Royal London or whatever it's called now, and all that sort of stuff. India definitely has a lot of players who don't play much red ball cricket unless they're playing test matches.
Very much so.
But you are seeing, of course, with T20 franchises now that you might get a player who plays T20 franchise, but if it's a franchise attached to a bigger competition, they're probably still in the overall system. So I'd still say at the moment England probably has more of those than anywhere else. I can't believe we got to Ollie Mortensen in this episode.
Indeed. I hadn't heard that name in a long time.
GD says, saw your exit interviews and uncovered episode this week. Couldn't help but think about which one of these teams' plans would derail the most by injuries. So Delhi had Pant, Hazelwood and Topley from RCB, Obed for Rajasthan, Iyer for KKR. So I think the one that was unpluggable, I suppose is the best way to put it, is Rishabh Pant, just because... I mean, I don't think Ayer's ever quite had the same impact, and he was also not a wicketkeeper. He's a one-skill player. Ayer's probably the second most, but Rishabh Pant, you just can't replace that. There is no other Rishabh Pant out there. And Hazelwood, I don't think the reason that RCB lost was specifically about not having Hazelwood. In fact, I think they took a lot of power play wickets anyways, my memory from going back. Topley would have helped them at the death, but I'm not sure Topley would have played that much, if we're being honest. Obed could have helped Rajasthan. I'd have to go back and have a look if Rajasthan need. Actually, Obed probably plays more when Jason Holder starts to get smashed everywhere.
That's true. Yeah.
Again, and that might have got them one game, right? But Obed, as good a player as he is, I don't think he's ever been that dominant in the IPL that you could guarantee he was going to have a big difference. Whereas out of all those people, the person who is that you can't replace is Rishabh Pant. Having said that, Delhi batted terribly, and even if they had him in the side, I'm not sure they would have been that much better of a team. But it's much easier to have that person there than not have them. But KKR also, I mean, Iyer and KKR is a perfectly good mention as well, I think.
Oh, very much so. I think for me, both Rishabh Pant and Shreyas Iyer are on par in terms of who were missed the most by their franchises, because they've become such senior figures within the IPL setup and Indian cricket setup as well. And Rishabh Pant has that ability to, though he has had times when he's obviously struggled with captaincy and the pressure of captaincy. We've seen that in the IPL last year, especially. But I think he has that ability to bring people together and, at least produce just 2 or 3 performances which are standout, which can win games for your franchise or any team he plays for single-handedly. Shreyas Iyer would have given them that consistency. I don't know whether he's had the same consistency for KKR that he used to for Delhi. Again, I don't follow the IPL as closely as Matt Roller does, but it feels like it hasn't been the same, but maybe I'm wrong. But he would have given them that 700 run season, or whatever, 700 maybe a bit too much, at least a 550 600 run season, especially in a year with impact players and on pitches where a lot of runs were being scored. I think Shreyas Iyer would have been a huge and he's a good captain. I mean, he's proven in his time at Delhi and KKR as well. He brings that calmness to the team as well as a captain. So I think Shreyas Iyer would have been missed as well. Obed McCoy, I'm a big fan of, but he had a good season for them last year. But
had a good few games. Injured. I don't think he's ever had a good season. He's never. Look, Obed McCoy hasn't been fit since he was 17. He plays about 3 months of cricket, and you go and you're like, oh, he could be the best left-arm bowler in the world. Then you don't see him for a year, and then he comes back, and he's. I don't think anyone's ever seen the best of Obed McCoy. And it's a real shame because he's a brilliant, brilliant bowler. Yeah, but yes, he would have played. The only thing about Iyer and Pant for me, it's really more about the keeping, because with Pant, you have to replace 2 players. And I just think that's if you're already struggling to make any runs and you also have to worry about your keeping position, I think it just makes it
Yeah.
all the more difficult.
Yeah.
Bloody Bugger says, what was the biggest World Cup upset? India in 83, Sri Lanka in 96. India in 83.
Yeah.
Only
Obviously.
because Sri Lanka managed to do it in home conditions and India had to win in England. And I think now everything we know, Sri Lanka was probably a better team.
Oh, yeah,
Sri Lanka
yeah,
was
yeah.
the better team, whereas India probably still wasn't the best team in 1983, and they still won it. So I would say that.
Oh, and also defending 183. It's
Yeah.
not that in India had like such a great one of those. They produced one of those performances which was so good for the West Indies that they were completely uh, undone or like outplayed. They were eventually, but yeah, I mean defending 183 against that West Indian batting lineup who were used to winning World Cups already, and who were still we were still at peak
Mm-hmm.
the glory of West Indies cricket, or the indomitability that they brought to cricket. So to beat that West Indian team away from home with not a lot of, you look at that Indian team as well, some great players, of course, some of the greatest who ever played the sport, but also a lot of other players who never went on to become greats, right? So for that unit to win against that West Indian team, I mean, uh, Balwinder Singh Sandhu is a great character, great coach in Mumbai cricket. But for him to get rid of Gordon Greenidge the way he did, I mean, we all know the story. There's been a movie made about it as well. So by far, that was a bigger upset. And Sri Lanka, look, they were uh, on the rise at that point, right? They had found Jayasuriya and Kalvitarana at the top of the order a few months prior to that in Australia.
Yeah, I think if you look at the whole history of it, you'd still say that Sri Lanka's a bigger upset because they came to cricket later. They were taken as a joke. India had like 50 years to get good and then win it. But if you actually factor in the teams and the conditions, and especially as you said, the Indian players didn't go on to be greats, right? The ones who were already great were great. Whereas with Sri Lanka, like even the players we didn't think that much of, like they got even better after that period. Only Kaluvitharana and maybe Dharmasena. Was Dharmasena still in that World Cup?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah,
They're maybe two of the only ones that didn't really kick on. Everyone else, like a lot of those other players, got better after that tournament. So we know how good that team was now. At the time, it was amazing because it happened so quickly. But I think if you're doing it really, methodically, I think it would have to be the Indian team.
Oh yeah, of course.
Apologies to everyone in Sri Lanka who has stopped listening to us. Graham says, can you explain the difference between the front foot no ball and the old back foot no ball? I never understood how it added more stress onto fast bowlers. So the back foot no ball law, when you would plant your back foot, you would then put your front foot on, but because you could drag your back foot forward, so you could actually, you're not putting all the impact on your front leg. So if you go and have a look at the best one is Ray Lindwall. Yeah. If you have a look at some of Ray Lindwall's bowling, you'll see that the stress on his body, you can just see it happening. It's a slingier action. So it's stressful in a different way, but it's not the force going into the braced front leg or the straight front leg. That's the difference that the two have. Whether, what was the guy who wrote the book?
I was reading about it.
Doug Ackley, is it?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Doug Ackley's, and we don't know, because Doug Ackley is talking about cricket at a point before people bowled with the front foot no ball. But what he has to also admit is that they also bowled about 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers slower. Yeah. Sometimes even slower than that, right? Yeah. We had seen bowlers probably bowling at 110, 115 kilometers an hour with the back foot no ball. Not Lindwall, not Miller and those guys.
No, of course not.
In general, fast bowling was way slower than it is now. Yeah. And so you have then, I'd say probably Griffith and Wes Hall are two of the first sort of front foot no ball style bowlers. A little bit more. If you look before, Lindwall and Larwood and those sorts of guys are a little bit slingier. Yeah. So with that in mind, we don't know if Doug Ackley is right when he says that there are less injuries now because there might just be more force going through bowlers because they're bowling quicker and they're more professional and everything else. But it certainly looks, when you look at the footage, like there's a lot more pressure going on a fast bowler's body, the way they hit the crease on the front foot no ball when they have to keep that foot locked, than there was with the back foot no ball and people could slide.
When you could, there was more give, right? And also, I think one thing Doug Ackley wrote about is because once the front foot no balls came into the picture, a lot of bowlers also you had to like kind of get the dive in to your delivery stride, right? Like to kind of get that force going through. So like you said, you couldn't just drag your feet. You see a lot of bowling actions from the past where they wouldn't have the very uh, who's a great example of that? Even like I don't know why I'm thinking Zahir Khan, but the proper leap into your delivery stride wasn't that common. Some bowlers did, but some bowlers didn't. But I'll give you an umpire's perspective on that. And a lot of people have said, I mean, Ian Chappell has spoken about this for years now, about how it's easier for the umpires to call back foot no balls, and it is true because just
Way easier.
yeah, it is right. Just speaking about the physics of it, it's like looking at these pair of headphones which don't work in lying in front of me and seeing if there's a light on it or not, and compare that with like, and you don't realize how far away from the popping crease you are, and popping crease is the one in front, which is used for the front foot no ball, when you are standing at the bowler's end, because you're not by the stumps, right? If those are the stumps, you stand. If those are the stumps, as an umpire. Okay, wait. Those are the stumps. Okay, wait.
For the podcast audience, Bharat is putting his hands up and has now confused himself where stumps are.
This is part of every show where I try to
Let me try and explain what I think you were trying to say. The first thing is you're saying that you are naturally further back from the stumps, and so you're already behind the back foot no ball line, and the popping crease is further in front. The other thing is that you have less time. When the back foot goes, you have a bit more time to put your head up and focus on the stumps and the ball at the other end. So in every way, it's a better thing for the umpires.
And yeah, see, you said head up. You don't even like move your head. If you move your head, it's gone.
Yeah,
it has to.
Point.
You just use your eyes. Your eyes kind of go dart down and dart back up. And yeah, especially when you're at times, it's even more challenging with spinners. We spoke about footwork and spinners early on because you see the spinners and you don't have time to kind of gauge the front foot at times, and also then with the front foot, and this makes it even more challenging. Different bowlers have a different way of landing their feet. I was speaking to
the foot up,
Richard
you mean?
Kettle, foot up, foot. So Ben Stokes, for example, his feet land like that. So what happens as a result is it's difficult to make out or always pick where the front foot is landed because his feet land right in front of each other. From that angle, it's difficult to make out. Stuart Broad is another one, where you can't and that's why you'll see a lot of those no balls being missed. It's not that they're doing it intentionally, but just how their feet land. It's the easiest if it's
like
someone
their body body in the back leg is actually blocking their front foot.
Exactly. Ben Stokes' back leg blocks the front leg. But you see Glenn McGrath, for example, it would be easier to pick because it's just the front foot that you're focusing on. But you gain so much time if it's the back foot no ball. Unfortunately, I've never umpired a game with the back foot no ball. I would love to just to see if it gives me time or not. Right? Like maybe there I could use my head. I wouldn't, but I would still use my eyes. But you're better placed. You're closer to the bowling crease than you are to the popping crease.
If you usually listen to this podcast on your podcast feed, it is worth just for Bharat's hands finding the YouTube and searching for it there. Emran says, what would be your first pick for a draft of a 3-format team? The player picked must have played a game in all 3 formats. Jasper Bumrah?
Yeah. David Warner?
He's maybe past his best.
Oh, I mean, okay.
But yeah, no. I mean, I'm right at the moment. If Bumrah was fit, I suppose it would be Bumrah. I'm trying to think if there's anyone else I've missed. I suppose Rabada would be pretty high up that list too.
I mean, Rashid Khan has played all 3 formats technically.
Well, yeah, it just depends on how you rate his one-day and Test cricket compared to everything else. But I think Bumrah comes to mind just because
for sure.
He's so good at all 3. Yeah. Whereas I think even Rabada, I know he's really good at all 3, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I wouldn't go Rabada, honestly. Yeah.
Peak Mitchell Stark, obviously. Josh Hazelwood's probably making a pretty good case for that.
Oh,
and Virat Kohli, before he lost form, would have been another one that would have been right up there as well.
Yeah, I mean, when
A.B. de Villiers back in the day.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there are plenty, actually, when you think about it. Hashim Amla, right? Like underrated T20 player. But, his record is across all 3 formats is brilliant.
Yeah. Aditya says, what's your take on Rinku Singh? Does he look like someone who can be consistent over a long period? I think he's had a year and a half that is good. And generally for me, I don't want to say that's enough, but when it's more than one season can be form. Yeah. When it's a year and a half, I start to think there's something there that works for him. so that he should be good over a long period. It doesn't mean he's going to be good year over year, but it means that he should be good over a decent amount of time. Whether he'll always be this good or not, it's hard for young players. You explode in, and then everyone does the research on you, and
Exactly. Yeah.
you know the Nicholas Perrin effect, right? That's going to happen to him as well. But I'd be shocked if he doesn't have a decent career over the next 3 to 4 years, even if he does have one down year.
Yeah, and he averages almost 60 in first class cricket as well. But I think when it comes to, if you say, is he going to be consistent over a long period of time as an overall, maybe are you asking if the question, Aditya, is about will he play international cricket? It depends on where India is headed next in terms of their T20I side. Like, next year, are they going to stick to some of their key one-day players like they have in the past few years, or are they going completely a different route and bringing in the likes of Yashasvi and Rinku Singh, and making a sort of a team based on their IPL performances? Then I think Rinku Singh, like, because he needs to still get the same role. What we've seen with him uh, throughout his time in the IPL is when he gets that specific role of being a finisher, he's been brilliant at it. But again, he has the skills to play first class cricket. Like I said, he plays for a good team as well. It's not that he doesn't face good attacks, and he has scored runs against proper opposition in first class cricket. So there's talent for sure. It's about when he breaks into the side, everything in life is about timing and what role he plays or what role he gets to play in that side.
Nadika says, do you agree with Malinga's comments that Patharana's T20 development would benefit from playing some Test cricket? So I think is it Dave Epstein who wrote the book Range, and he did this big speech in New York one time, and he sat down to talk about how young athletes should play all these different kinds of sports. And Serena Williams walked in on the thing, and he was like, "Oh God, she's gonna like say I'm completely wrong, and you should play tennis." And she said the opposite. She said her father made her play all these different sports to learn all these different skills. I would say the exact same thing if a young cricketer. Firstly, obviously, on the way up to the age of 18, I think it's better if you play multiple skills. I think there are so many things you can learn. But once you get between 18 and 22, I also think you want to play red ball cricket, 50 over cricket, T20 cricket, even T10 cricket, because they all teach you slightly different things. And eventually, you're going to need all of those skills. You know, it may not happen, but if you're in the final of this IPL tournament and there's any help on the wicket, Mohammad Shami is bowling to you. If you've only played T20 cricket, right, that is not going to help you against Mohammad Shami bowling line and length, right? No. It's just not, because there is no other bowler of that talent that you will ever have to go up against who's probing and moving the ball both ways and doing the things that he does. There is a big thought in the West Indies that a lot of their players not playing red ball cricket as much actually hindered their development in T20 cricket. Nicholas Perrin has talked about that directly, but a lot of the older players talk about it. I just think the more lessons you can learn up until 22, it's almost at 21, 22 when you want people to start to become specialists so they can get those things. But learning everything in that 4 or 5 years beforehand is so important for me. So this isn't a Patharana question. This is really how you develop players.
And it can be linked to the Rinku Singh question as well. In terms of like, he still has the ability to have. He's not coming out there and smashing sixes from ball. I mean, he can at times, but the times he's finished off games, he started slow. He's got his eye in, and I think a lot of that comes from playing first class cricket, where he knows how to build an innings. It's just that it's more constricted in a T20 format, and as a batter, especially, that's the skill you learn from playing the longer format, I'm sure. But in the Patirana case, I'm really interested in saying, like, so on one hand, you have Malinga, a Sri Lankan legend, saying he needs to play Test cricket. On the other hand, you have Patirana CSK captain, MS Dhoni, saying, giving advice to Sri Lanka, saying, keep him away from Test cricket, keep him only for ICC tournaments, and let him flourish in all these franchise formats. So, I think the way, it's an underrated narrative, underrated story in this larger narrative of the influence of Indian cricket and the IPL. But I'm very keenly now invested in seeing where the Patirana story goes next. If he never plays red ball cricket for Sri Lanka or in Sri Lanka, then you know where the influence is coming from.
The interesting thing about that is that CSK don't really use him early in the innings, and that's because he doesn't have a lot of good skills for early in the innings, whereas Malinga did. And so I think that's why Malinga's saying it. And so in some ways, MS Dhoni is limiting where his bowler can be good. He's saying, you just double down. We'll just use you in the back half. Whereas actually, if Patharana could also be handy in the power play or even in the early middle overs, whatever other role that they can give him, that's better for CSK. So it's a really interesting little dynamic, but that's because Dhoni thinks in such specialized ways of, no, you're already really good at this. Keep getting good at this, and I'll work the team around you. Quick break, and then we've got a couple of super chats, and then we'll talk more about mustaches here on Wagon Wheel.
Let me tell you a story. When I was a kid, people would ask my dad if he wanted me to be Viv Richards, and he always said no, he wanted me to be Boycott, because apparently he liked boring things. But anyway, it turned out I could be neither. But thanks to Bodyline t-shirts, I can wear clothes showing both players. The Boycott stick of rhubarb is one of my favourite t-shirts. I really like the design. And it's not the only one I love. There's also a WG Grace one where he's in a pedalo, which is a part of my everyday wardrobe now. But there are heaps of other cool shirts on this site, and you can search for them by nations or type, and they seem to add to them all the time. I'm a big fan of the Court Marsh Bold Lily in the Australian collection, and there's also a lovely Morning Everyone in honour of Richie Benaud's great greeting. The English area has the Fast Leg Theory shirt, which I think is a ripper. There's a couple of great West Indian ones I love, including this simple Viv Richards design, and a couple of Capel Dev t-shirts in the Indian section that I simply must have. I'm not saying that Bodyline t-shirts will have something that you will like, but I will say this, they got me to wear a Jeffrey Boycott inspired t-shirt. And that in itself is a minor miracle.
Welcome back to Wagon Wheel, as Bharat quickly puts his phone away. Just a couple of super chats that have come through. Pranjal says, hey, Jarrod, is... Oh, wait, it's better if I put it on the screen. Pranjal says, is Jarrod... Hey, Jarrod. I don't know why I'm reading out, hey, Jarrod. I'm Jarrod anyway. Is Double Century coming back? Yes, Double Century's coming back. So we used to do it in seasons. And then when 99.94 was active, we took it to weekly. It will be coming back in the next couple of weeks. I think me and, what's the bloke who does it with me? Mukherjee. Mr. Mukherjee I pretty much got the next season done. So it will be about a 3-month season. So at the very least, when it starts again, it will have about 12 episodes coming back. But yeah, we love it. That podcast, and myself, Abhishek, and Nick, it's one of our favorite things to do. So it's just it's about money, and it's about time, and it's, just how we can put things together. But we're certainly doing that. Manan has a question for Bharat. A little off topic, but does Bharat watch any kind of sports entertainment? You watch cricket and wrestling? Do you watch anything outside? Do you watch MMA, or do you just perform that with Mitchell Johnson?
Just perform that with Mitchell Johnson, or he performs those moves on me. That sounds wrong. But no, I've never really gotten into real life martial arts. And look, with pro wrestling, I just like the business side of it and the storyline bit of it. I spoke about the Matish Patirana story. I mean, that's how you talk about young wrestlers in pro wrestling. Like, okay, someone has a great story. Let's see how it develops, not just in the next or that same night on Monday Night Raw or on AEW Dynamite, but where does this story go in the next 6-7 months? And I think it's a great art form of storytelling. That's the bit I've really enjoyed watching. Well, that's why I enjoy watching pro wrestling. Sports entertainment, I don't know if like sports documentaries work as so like, when they go behind the scenes. Like, even though I don't watch a lot of American football, I love watching the background stories, or Hard Knocks, is that what it's called? I love watching Hard Knocks. It is sports entertainment, right? Like, they're talking about real training and real life, who gets drafted or who gets picked, who gets delisted, and those are stories. So I think I've watched, when it says sports entertainment, I like the storytelling aspect of sport, and every sport has it. Look, there's so much, not just the live footy that I watch here in the hills, or like, when I go to the Adelaide Oval on TV.
Do you barrack for one of the Adelaide teams?
I used to barrack I still barrack for the Norwood Redlegs, who famously won the SANFL last year by 1 point. It was one of the great SANFL finals. Here, I want to get into barracking the Uredla Demons, who also wear the red and the blue, much like the Norwood Redlegs. And the Oval is just a 7-minute walk from here, and it's downhill, thankfully.
So the Redlegs, this is now just a podcast for you and I, but the Redlegs, one of my childhood friends, my childhood tennis partner, Brett Zorzi, was their captain for quite a few years. So I think he's in the museum or something. I think he moved over to Adelaide. So he played, never quite made it to the AFL, but played professionally in Victoria and then professionally in South Australia for a long time. So there you go. Brett Sawsey. One of the nicest people I've ever met. It was a brilliant junior athlete. He was just, from an AFL perspective, probably 1.5 inches, 2 inches too short to quite make it to the top level. But just a very, very good. He was very good at cricket as well. Just a natural, anything that you threw at him. The NFL thing you were talking about. So I look back at, obviously I read a lot of different kinds of things. One of the few sports sort of things that ever touched me was the old NFL films. And we didn't see a lot of NFL in Australia, but for whatever reason, every second Sunday there would be like this, a video on the Green Bay Packers or the Steelers, some team or some player. He worked in a bar and now he's getting smashed in the face. And that had such a big impact on me because it was before sports documentaries. Well, I mean, I'd say sports documentaries only really become a big thing in the last 10 years, really, but certainly before they were a big thing. That was, always remember that when you talk about stories. NFL was absolutely brilliant at that side of things. And I never followed NFL. I don't even have a team to this day. I think it's a great sport, but I don't really follow it. But I always remember that. So there you go. There's a...
my favorite things to watch as a child were the annual Wimbledon videos, right? Like every year they would have like... and the best thing would be like... they started appearing in the 90s, I think, at least what I remember. So if, say... while you're waiting for the 1998 Wimbledon to start or the 2002 Wimbledon to start, they would on loop kind of play the Wimbledon films from each of the previous years, and they were brilliant.
They were quite good too. Yeah, I remember those. Yeah,
like, each week would start with a different angle. They would pick. They wouldn't only focus on the main players. And again, going back to wrestling, that's the beauty, right? It's not just always about The Rock or Stone Cold Steve Austin, but everybody seems to have like a story, and that's how the Wimbledon films were made as well.
One more from Bart 8881 with a massive super chat here. We can get you mustache wax. I don't know if that's a thing. Do you see parallels in the coming of age stories of Gill versus Shaw and Virat versus Rohit, in that one was anointed prodigy while the other one chiseled and sculpted himself away into goatness, or is that reductive AF? And look, I think if you remember, Prithvi Shaw was kind of anointed before Shubman Gill was, and then it switched on like literally Prithvi Shaw missed a couple of balls in Adelaide and suddenly he was a dud, and Shubman Gill was the one, and it's like, well, geez, everyone was missing balls in Adelaide. And I do think that this is part of the problem. It's funny, this is another storytelling issue for me. It'd be interesting to see what you think about this. But I do think that the narratives change so quickly in Indian cricket at the moment, and you can put Pakistan cricket in there as well, and we talked about Bangladesh as well, but they change so quickly. It's really, I feel a lot for these guys, because they do read what is on social media. They do hear what people are saying, and it does affect them in a way that in the old days, you might not have an article written about you for a month in a newspaper about cricket. That just doesn't happen anymore, right? You're constantly, someone is writing something. There is, an Instagram post talking about how on Wednesdays you don't make any runs or whatever it may be. And I think it does affect people. And it does end up being this hero versus hero or hero versus villain narrative. And, we know how bad it got with Virat versus Rohit and the whole thing.
Oh,
and, it got so sick. And I do think that it puts pressure on these players. And Prithvi Shaw isn't like Rohit, right? And Shubman Gill isn't really like Virat. They're already different kinds of players. They're different kinds of people. And I think it's all it's a bit like, trying to get Sam Worthington to be a hero because, Russell Crowe's too old to play those roles anymore. Well, Sam Worthington has to be a different kind of hero because he's not the same kind of actor as Russell Crowe.
And it's different generation as well. And as someone who, going back to what he said about Prithvi Shaw, I mean, he was anointed as the next big thing when he was born, literally. I always had this joke. I mean, nobody has had more godfathers in cricket than Prithvi Shaw. Honestly, in Bombay, there's been a battle on for years about who saw Prithvi Shaw first. And his father doesn't even feature in the conversation. There are so many people who say, I saw him when he was 2 and he was hitting all these 30-year-olds for boundaries, and there are someone else will say, no, I saw him when he was 1.5 and he was, smashing hundreds
I
in
saw
under
the
19
glint in his father's eye make a slashing 50 at the Oval Maidan.
I know. I saw his father make a 50 5 years before Prithvi Shaw was born, and
I knew one day he would have progeny that would
He
represent India. Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's a perfect example of how do you live up to that, right? And
Yeah.
we're watching. I've been watching the Lakers Nuggets in the NBA this week. Obviously, Nuggets doing well, but the LeBron story is so interesting. Everything LeBron does is so much about legacy, and it's
Yeah.
because if he doesn't look after his own legacy, it's just like ripped to shreds by everyone in the
Completely,
media all the
yeah.
time. And he's too obsessed by his own legacy, but it doesn't start with him, right? He just started being a kid who was really good at basketball. And then at 15, everyone says he's going to be the best player since Michael Jordan. And then at 25, they say
Yeah.
he might be better than Michael Jordan. At 35, is he better than Michael Jordan? It's like, he's just really good at basketball. But that's not how we see these things.
And it's in an Indian cricket context, then it also depends on where you come from. Like the one advantage I would say Shubman Gill had over Prithvi Shaw is he didn't come from Bombay. So Prithvi Shaw, I've been part of it. All of us have written about Prithvi Shaw from the time he was 6 or 7. To be on a very serious note, I remember the headline in 2010, Showstopper, which was about him catching the train from a faraway suburb outside Bombay, taking the train. He was this little cute, little chubby kid, and then he goes to England. Everybody knows the Prithvi Shaw story before he even like played under 19 cricket for India. So Shubman Gill comes from Punjab, and I remember interviewing Shubman Gill as well before they left for the under 19 World Cup, which they eventually won. And now we know his stories. It comes from a well-to-do family in Punjab, and his father used to hire all these farmhands to bowl at him. But Shubman Gill wasn't being written about when he was 8 and 9. There's a good and a bad to it. So everybody knew about Prithvi Shaw. That meant that he had to grow up much faster than a Shubman Gill would have had to, because there's so much focus and so much scrutiny on everything he did. I think Virat versus Rohit, again, for that you have to understand how the culture of journalism is different in Bombay and Delhi. In Mumbai, we just have this tendency of building up, because maybe of the Tendulkar effect. There was always the search for the next Tendulkar, and Rohit Sharma just happened to be that guy. And he has this great. So the first ever T20 domestic tournament was held in 2006 in India, and Rohit Sharma has a great time. He goes to the Under 19 World Cup. Doesn't have a great Under 19 World Cup, but then very soon after that he makes his debut for India in 2007. And he's, because he comes from Mumbai, because he is playing alongside Tendulkar, because he was so easy on the eye, he's just anointed as the next big thing. And then Virat Kohli a year later wins the Under 19 World Cup. And in Delhi, they don't, I don't know why, but Delhi cricket is different. It's always fractured. There are always a lot of factions between, and it historically been the case, at least from my time in journalism. There'll be a Gambhir camp, there'll be a Sehwag camp, there'll be not just the players, people in charge. Whereas in Mumbai, if we found a cricketer who we thought we could hype, we went all out. All of us did it, and there was that almost everybody came together when there was an exciting Mumbai cricketer on the horizon. Whereas in Delhi, it depended on which camp you belong to, which is why I think Virat didn't get that hype early on as much as Rohit did, and similar to Prithvi Shaw and say Shubman Gill.
Yeah. No, I think, and you see that right across the board, right? You see, Shiv Narayan Chandrapal not getting the hype that Brian Lara does, because Trinidad versus Guyana, and the Barbados cricketers are the most famous example of that in the West Indies. And, you have a young batter who makes a lot of runs in Hobart, they're not going to get the same press that a young batter in New South Wales does. And you build that up. And as you said, then sometimes it's a regional thing within those, all those things. But when it gets to this level, I just don't think it's beneficial for any of those players. But there's not much you could do. The sport is the sport, and people are going to talk their shit.
Exactly, and that's eventually it'll come down to the numbers, right? Yeah.
But thank you very much for that super chat. Thank you to Manan and to Pranjal, and to everyone on Patreon as well. You, Bharat Sundaresan, are not going to be on Wagon Wheel next week. Because you're coming over to England for the tests. So you, sir, are going to be on what do you call it? You're going to be on Uncovered, your actual podcast. So I will see you on Monday, and we'll do a chat then. And thank you to everyone else, and we'll all see you very, very soon.
If you like what we are making here and you want to know if you can help out, well, you can. On top of asking super chats on our lives, you can also support us through Patreon or buy me a coffee. The more support we can get, the better and more videos we can make. On Patreon, there are plenty of other things we offer too, like a Discord server, the chance to ask questions directly, AMAs, and early versions of our recordings. This channel only exists because people like you help support it. We have to buy equipment, software, pay wages, and my mortgage, I suppose, just to make this stuff happen. And if you don't have any money available to spend, it isn't just your money we want. Shares, likes, retweets, comments, subscriptions, the little bell icon thing, all of it. They help us build and become more professional, make more videos, better videos, all that sort of stuff. So thank you for watching.